Hi everyone, welcome to the first devlog for my indie game tentatively titled Green Castle. There's a reason for that name and I might get into it in a later video, but in this devlog I'll talk about the inspiration for the game and the first bits of progress that I've made on it. So what is Green Castle? I'm planning for it to be a throwback RPG in the style of the NES and Genesis Classic RPGs, games like Dragon Warrior, Phantasy Star, and Final Fantasy. One of my big goals with this game is to make a simple game. I'm not really trying to come up with any crazy new mechanics or innovative modern twists on a classic genre. A while ago, I was playing the original NES Dragon Warrior, a game that I played endlessly as a kid, and I really found myself enjoying the simplicity of it. Sure, it has some clunkiness that I'd iron out in regards to stuff like the menu system and UI, but the simple gameplay was refreshing. Maybe I'm alone in this, but I often find myself yearning for simplicity in gaming. For example, another favorite genre of mine is tower defense. It seems like so many tower defense games nowadays have gimmicks and mechanics that make them more complicated. Stuff like characters to control and move around, complex RPG systems or other systems tacked on, real-time strategy elements, etc. Whereas I just really enjoy the core gameplay loop of build towers, kill enemies, get money, repeat. I don't necessarily want all that extra stuff. When browsing tower defense games on Steam, I find myself drawn to the ones that really stick as close to that simple formula as possible. And I feel a similar way about RPGs. I really like the simplicity of the old SNES and NES RPGs, so I figured I would make one myself. I'm using Godot to develop this game, and if you watched my previous devlog video, you'll know that I have no formal programming experience and no real game dev experience. The most I've done is completed a few game jams, so pretty much everything I'm doing here to develop this game is a learning experience. When I need to implement a new system, I just try to figure it out. Speaking of systems, that's where I decided to start on developing the game. I jotted down what systems this RPG game would need. What I decided was, number one, a movement and interaction system. So basically being able to move the player around the overworld, through towns, dungeons, and interact with NPCs to talk, and interact with objects like doors and switches. Number two, an inventory system. I'll need a way for players to collect and store their gear and items. Number three, an equipment system. I'll need a system for allowing players to equip gear that they buy or find. Number four, a skill system. The player is going to have various skills to use in combat, so I'll need a way to organize them and utilize them. Number five, a battle system. Obviously, the player is going to do lots of fighting in this RPG, so I'll need a system for handling that. Number six, a chat system. The player will need to talk to NPCs. Number seven, a quest system. This is one improvement I'd like to make over the old NES RPGs. In those games, you just have to track your quests in your head or write them down on paper, but I'd like to implement a more modern quest log in the game. Number eight, a leveling system. Players will get experience from combat, and they'll need to be able to level up to increase their stats and combat abilities. I figured the best place to start was with the movement system. That's pretty basic, and it would lead into all the other stuff. So I fired up Godot. Getting a sprite on the screen to move around is something I've done a few times during the game jams I've completed, so I was actually able to do this pretty easily. The next step was allowing the player to interact, which at first just involved printing some output to the console when you press the E key. After that, I put a dummy placeholder, the NPC, that would receive the interact signal when used while you were near and facing it. I also put down some test collision just to see how the movement worked when hitting an object. The collision is something I'll definitely revisit in the future. At this point, I had a player character moving around and able to interact with the world. Great. So the next question was what to work on next. What I wanted to do was start making sprites and textures and creating the world. I've got so many ideas, but I stopped myself. I really don't want to get lost in the superficial stuff at the expense of the core gameplay mechanics. So instead, since I have a character who's able to interact with a placeholder NPC, I thought maybe I should work on the chat system. I have no idea how to implement a chat system, so I started watching some YouTube tutorials to get ideas for how I might manage it. After watching a few videos, it dawned on me that maybe the chat system isn't the best next step to work on. I thought about what the player would be spending the majority of the time doing in-game, and the answer to that is combat. In a simple RPG like this, pretty much everything revolves around combat. You fight to get gear, you fight to get experience and level up, you fight while exploring, and you fight to complete quests. So I shelved the chat system and turned my attention to the combat. If you've ever used Godot, you'll know that it uses scenes. At the moment, I had a world scene that contained the character to walk around in. I created a new scene called a battle scene, and this is where the character would fight. For testing purposes, I tied it to the dummy NPC, so when the player interacts with the NPC, it sends you to the battle scene. I immediately found that building an RPG battle system from scratch, even one as simple as what I'm planning, is a bit overwhelming. So I started breaking it down into the smallest steps I could. For example, first, just load the player. Okay, the player shows up on the screen. Now he needs a health bar. Okay, I got that loading. Now he needs a mana and energy bar. Okay, done. Now load an enemy. Done. At this point, I had a choice to make. In the old school RPGs I'm basing this on, the combat is done in the turn-based style, and that's fine, but I'm not a huge fan of turn-based combat. Another one of my favorite games of all time is EverQuest. I always enjoyed the combat of EverQuest. It's real time, but not exactly action combat. If you've ever played it, you know what I mean. You basically stand in front of your opponent and press the abilities you want to use in real time as your opponent uses abilities against you. There's no real movement like dodging or positioning for the most part. So I decided to try and mimic something like that in my game instead of going with the more typical Final Fantasy style turn-based combat. So when the battle screen loads, the enemy will start attacking the player, and the player needs to respond without any pauses or turns for thinking. I decided that the player would be able to choose 6 abilities to bring into combat, so I built a simple hotbar at the bottom of the screen to hold the abilities. Godot has a pretty complex system of nodes for building UI, and I'm confident I did not make this hotbar in the most efficient or correct way, but it works. I made some test abilities to put into the hotbar. My goal was to have a variety of ability types, so direct damage, damage over time, area of effect, heals, cures, nullifications, buffs, debuffs. I started with the most basic of these, which is just direct damage. My initial plan was to have some abilities that were instant cast and some that had a cast time. But as I was coding, I messed something up that made the instant cast abilities not actually instant cast. So everything was casting as a cast time. I actually ended up liking this a lot more, so I kept it. I also found that it simplified the code a bit, so now everything has a cast time, even if it's only a fraction of a second. At this point, I had a solid foundation established for the battle screen. The player can pick abilities, use them to deal damage to the enemy. My next step is to make it so the enemy can attack the player. Now I'm going to end this devlog there. In the next one, I'll talk about working on the enemies and some of the struggles I experienced with AI. Thanks for watching.